Cheryl's really working at the grassroots of UFO research, so she really has her ear to the ground and her finger on the pulse as to people's different experiences, paranormal phenomena, all kinds of different things, and so she's really working with the community, and massive respect for that, because it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of work, and she's there doing it continually and is putting in the hours and really making a difference to get this information out there to create awareness on the topic. So please welcome the paradigm shifter herself, Sheryl Gottschall.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you for putting on this amazing summit. It's been wonderful. And hello, paradigm shifters. Let me get my head together. Right. Paranormal researcher and writer Charles Fort is known to have told a story, a very interesting story, of a cat that appeared before a crowd of people and turned to them and said, "Hot enough for you?" before disappearing in a puff of smoke right before their very eyes. And to me, that story represents the idea that extraordinary encounters can happen to ordinary people anytime, anywhere. And so it was for one of our co-founders of UFO Research Queensland, a man by the name of Ricky Royal. And Ricky was flying his plane over Bass Strait in 1944 when he saw about 100 feet from his plane at 45 feet altitude, he saw this large dark cloud appear before his plane, pacing his plane. And out the back of the cloud, it was belching flames for about 150 feet. And I have no doubt that that was actually a huge paradigm shift for Ricky as he was flying his plane, being aware of what's going on in the skies and seeing something like that right before his very eyes in the sky. In 1956, Ricky went on to form UFO Research then it was called Queensland Flying Saucer Research Bureau, and with two other people. And they formed the association because they were dissatisfied with the way the authorities were handling the UFO subject. And we're still dissatisfied with the way the authorities are handling the UFO subject, particularly since they sent us this letter. In 1944, the Department of Defence sent out a letter to all the civilian UFO groups in Australia saying that they would no longer be handling UAS, unusual aerial sightings, or UFOs, reports from the public, because apparently groups like ours were doing such a wonderful job. And apparently we have so many resources that we can take on doing that, taking those reports, which of course isn't true. So, but that's probably the public face of how the authorities are handling the UFO subject. And we believe that there is a very private, secret way that they are handling them as well. Speaking of privacy and secrecy, one of the things that we know about extraterrestrials, UFOs, call them what you like, living life forms, I don't know exactly what they are, what all of them are. But we do know that they know things about us. And one good case about this was a woman who was driving home in 1992 from work in the early hours of the morning. Her name was Rita Hayden, and she went on to actually become president of the Ipswich UFO group, which is west of Brisbane. Anyway, in 1992, she was driving home and she saw a light off in the distance. And the light came closer and closer to her, and it actually came down and paced her car. And she said that if she had the nerve to put her arm out the window, she could have touched it. And the object was sleek, it was silver, she couldn't see any joins or rivets, nothing like that. And she drew this sketch, and that's what she saw. It had a light behind it. So Rita had to pull up at a boom gate And when she did, there was a car in front of her, and when she did, the object took off. And the object disappeared off into the distance. Rita drives home towards her place. She's driving down the street and she sees, before she turns into her own driveway, the object's hovering over her neighbour's garage. And she's summoning up the nerve to be able to drive in to her property, get out of the car, race inside to her house, which she eventually did. And when she did that, she got on the phone and she's talking to my husband at the time, who was, our number is the contact for the public, to report their experiences. So the object hovered there for an hour, and as it did, it lit up the place like daylight. And this is something that we hear a lot of. People say it lit it up like as bright as day. Sometimes it might be green, sometimes it might be yellow or white, but the place is lit up. Anyway, and then it hovered there and it took off after an hour. The next morning, Rita went out into the backyard and she was looking at were there any effects in the backyard. She found a foot of water had disappeared from a swimming pool. The large mango tree in the backyard that was there died off very quickly. And the little dog, the neighbour's dog that had been yapping at this object hovering over the backyard for an hour, over the next month it lost all its hair and it died. So it's a very good example of leaving a ground trace or a trace on the environment. And again, it shows us that they knew, or this object knew, where Rita lived. So there's some sort of monitoring process going on with the UFO phenomenon. And that's just another sketch of what she saw. Another case happened on the Gold Coast in 1993, and this woman was working at Admiral North Towers at the time, and she was outside in the evening washing the towels that a client's guests had been using, and she's hanging them out on the line. And she said that she turned around for some reason and she saw this large, silent, grey metallic craft hovering close by, and it was shining yellow lights out through the windows. Oh, I haven't got that. There's a sketch of hers there. There we are. 15 to 20 feet across, 8 to 10 feet high, 6 to 7 windows around the middle, hovering silently. And she too said, if I'd had a long-handled broom, I could have reached out and touched it as well. So she raced inside, watching the object, and as she went inside and hunkers down because she's frightened, little disco lights, she said, appeared in her room and started spinning around. She said the lights were going all around. And I've heard this again and again and again. The object moved away a little bit, hovered in the area for an hour, and then it took off. Another thing we know about UFOs is that they move through solid matter. This one was exceptionally interesting because it happened outside the Twin Towns RSL in 1996. And some of these cases are a bit old, but I wanted to show you these because they have particular elements in them that I want you to know about. Now, in this particular case, there were two gentlemen outside the Twin Towns RSL, outside having a cigarette. And as they were there, they saw this object cut down through the clouds. And as it would happen, the main witness was an artist. So he went home and he sketched what he saw. But it came to within 50 metres of where they were standing. It was huge, and you'll see how big in a minute, and hovered 10 feet above the water. And it stayed there for a while and then it took off. And this is where they saw it from in reality. Oh, it is a bit dark, isn't it? And this is he's got this image from the newspaper and he's sketched in the object here to give you an idea of the massive size of the object. And as it took off, he said, through the buildings. And his exact words were, "It cut through those buildings like they were made of butter." So we know that these objects, whatever they are, can go through solid objects. And that we know from some close encounter cases that they can actually move people through solid objects too. And here's another sketch of his. He describes it as black, yet shone bright silver. And he also described it as having facets as well. Another thing we know about the UFO phenomenon, and I'm sure many of you have seen this in some of the movies, there is always, not always, there is often electrical interference with vehicles or things like radios, any sort of electrical things really. So in this particular case, a woman was driving her car in 1988 on the road from Cunnamulla to Burke, I think it was. And this gives you an idea of the area, what it's like there, which is a bit dark. Anyway, she was driving her V8 car along the highway in the evening. And this is her sketch of what she saw outside her window. And she saw this triangular shape appear with the colours, many different colours within it. And it would change from an elongated diagonal shape to a tall diagonal shape. Long diagonal shape, tall diagonal shape. So it's ebbing and changing shape as she's driving along. She too said she could have put her arm out the window and touched it if she'd been brave enough. Now this is another sketch of hers, and she said as this was happening, these little bright, pretty soft blue pea-sized lights started buzzing around her limbs and her torso. Now she could see in the mirror that they were buzzing around her head. Obviously she couldn't see them normally. So these were things that could reflect in a mirror, okay? And this went on for some time. And as she's driving along and this light's ebbing and moving, changing shape beside her, and these little blue lights are around her body, off in the distance when she's driving on the country road, as the oncoming vehicle's lights would appear, these other lights would disappear until the vehicle passed. She could see in the rear view mirror that the lights of that vehicle would disappear, and then then this would all start again. The light out the window, the little blue lights around the body. And that went on for quite some time. So by the time she got to her parents' place, and she was about 20 at the time, she was pretty petrified about what had gone on. Now the interesting thing about this one with the electrical interference is when these lights would appear around her body and beside the car, the radio would become static, the car would start to cough and sputter. Now this is the first time I've ever received a report of a vehicle having an after effect. We often have reports of people having after effects, but this one was where the vehicle would start by itself, take off and stop by itself, and she wouldn't be in it. This was witnessed by the people in Cunnamulla, to the point so often that it actually became a laughing matter. And they'd say, "Oh, there goes Miss X's car down the road again." So, and she said, I would be, somewhere inside with the key in my pocket and the car's taking off. Can you imagine? So, one particular time was where she'd pulled up to the garage. She had, the gas attendant in those days was still putting the petrol in for her. She's inside looking at what she can, ready to pay and buying something else. And he's standing there with the gas like this, and it just takes off, leaving him standing there. So, yeah, you can imagine, what would you think if that happened to you? So anyway, that's the very first time I've actually had a case like that, where the vehicle will move off by itself. Now the other thing we know about people who report close encounters is they can sometimes report missing time. Or sometimes people just report missing time and then they start to get a clue, well hang on, maybe I've had some sort of other strange thing going on. Now, this is a really interesting case. Again, it was reported to me this year, and it's actually a second-hand report. We do like the first-hand reports, but this one was by a woman who told me the story of her friend. Now, as we know, in the outback Australia, particularly in Queensland, there's such large properties, people often have a light plane to get around. And this woman was flying into a property to meet family and friends. And she got there and there was no one there to greet her. She thought, that's very strange, I wonder what's going on. The friends, on the other end of the experience, they're waiting for her to arrive and they're going, well, she's not here, what's happening? 2 hours gone, 3 hours gone, 4 hours gone, better call the rescue people. So they sent out a search and rescue for her. For how long? 1 day? 2 days. She went missing for 2 days. Now what happened was, when both groups of people met up, she said, where have you been? And they said, where have you been? Because she said, I've just arrived, I thought you'd all be here. And they said, no, you were supposed to be here 2 days ago. And she hadn't turned up. As far as she was concerned, she'd been just flown an hour or two to this other property to meet these people. So somehow her plane had managed to stay in the air for 2 days. I don't know how that happened, but again, this is an extreme case of missing time because we have technology involved as well. And there's possibly some of you in here, and I would say probably in this room, it's usually 1 in 30 people will say that they've actually had a sighting, and 1 in 15 may have had a close encounter. So you could now be sitting next to someone who's secretly sitting there going, sounds like my experience. But perhaps they may or may not tell you about it. Another case of missing time was in New Zealand, reported some years ago again, but it occurred in 1977 where a young man, he was about 8 at the time, 8 or 10, his mother had decided to take him and his friend on a holiday. So they went to Lake Taupo and they went there for a while. And the boys are sitting on the beach one evening and they see these 2 lights off in the distance. This is his sketch. And one of the lights, they're looking at it going, I don't know, is that a planet? What is that? I'm not really sure what that is, but it's not what we would expect to see there. Anyway, while they're watching it, one of them disappears up, one of them takes off like that. Boom, gone. Next thing they know, they're standing there now looking, where did it go, where did it go? And then they're suddenly surrounded in a circle of blue light. And at exactly the same time, they turn to each other and they say, you're all blue. And the next thing they know is that the main witness who I spoke to, he's running along on the beach. And he's running and he's running. And as he's running, he's looking side to side, looking for his friend. He can't find him. He doesn't know why he's running. He's just running. As he looks a little later, he sees his friend suddenly appears beside him, who's also running. And they run all the way back to where they're staying. They get back home. Typically, they try and tell the mother what's gone on. The mother says, oh, don't be silly, nonsense, nonsense, just get into bed, get into bed. The next morning, the mother is outside and she's hanging out some washing, and then she's saying to the neighbour there, I had a terrible time with those boys last night. I just couldn't get them to sleep, couldn't get them into bed. And they told me this strange story, silly story about aliens and spaceships and all this sort of stuff. And the neighbour says, well, actually, on the radio this morning, I heard reports of people in the area of seeing unusual lights in the sky. So this is what often happens for people, is that, they're ridiculed and then they may not talk about it for a long time. So it's something that happens sadly, but it does happen. Now this is another aspect of the UFO phenomenon, which brings in the connections for me that I'm interested in to the afterlife. And this particular case occurred in 1988, where a woman was driving from the Gold Coast up to Cairns, and on her way with her husband, they were going to do a bit of fossicking. They got to an area somewhere around Sapphire and the car strangely broke down. When they got there, the husbands, it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They're thinking, well, where are we going to stay? We're in the middle of nowhere. What are we going to do? How are we going to get out of here? So the husband's under the hood, tinkering with the car, trying to get it to work. The woman goes for a walk to see if she can see anything in the area that's something that might help them. She just goes over the crest of a hill, and guess what? She finds a camping area, caravanning and camping area. So, which turns out to be, these days, the Sapphire Caravan Park. So, they decide to stay there, and for some reason she picks this accommodation is one of those preset tents. So she's lying in the tent in the evening, enjoying the night, looking through the open tent flap, and she sees this. She sees a bright light off in the distance, and out of it comes these boomerang-shaped objects, double boomerang-shaped objects. And she's thinking, well, if there are UFOs, I think I've just seen one. Next thing she knows, she's standing in this space, this place, which she has no idea where it is, and she's standing on under an old-fashioned lamp somewhere with some sort of boardwalk under her feet. So she's been taken out of where she was and put into this, or appears to appear into this scene. Whether she was put there or not is a question. Next thing she knows, this ship, I don't know what you call it, container ship, anyway, with 4 people and one of them holding a small child. And they arrive, and they're very human looking, and they're wearing these silver suits. And they stand up in this vehicle, and one holding the child says, "I've brought your future son." And she said, I didn't even know what was going on. And she says, and telepathically communicating with her too. And they want to give her the son. And she says, I can't, I don't know, I'm not ready to have a child. I can't have this child. I think there's something wrong with me at the moment physically, and I'm not sure I can actually carry a child. And anyway, what happens is they spray her down. So they're wearing this suit. One of them has a backpack, sprays her down so that she guesses so that she's purified somehow. And as soon as she's wet, she's dry, she said. They hand her the child, and she holds the child, she cuddles the child, and eventually she says, she wants to give it back because she said, I can't have this child at this stage. Because what had happened was, before she left, she found out she was actually just pregnant. Okay, but she didn't tell her husband at the time. Anyway, so she manages to give the child back, lots of tears, and they take the child away. Later on, on the way to Cairns, she starts to hemorrhage, and she actually has a miscarriage, which is very interesting that she has that, and then she's had this experience, a day or two before, where she says, I can't have the child. Anyway, these beings, this is what, a likeness of what they look like. Very human looking, but wearing this full body suit from head to toe. And she's had ongoing experiences as well, missing time, gain time, all sorts of things, precognitive experience, dreams, all sorts of things like that. Now, in January this year, I became involved with a project called Project Newsprint, and it was devised by a UFO researcher in Adelaide called Keith Basterfield. And Keith's idea was to contact all the regional newspapers to sort of solicit UFO reports that haven't been reported yet. And he did Western Australia and South Australia, and I did Queensland, and that's about as far as we got, because it took a lot of time and effort. So what happened was, after that experience, we confirmed what we believed to be true, which was that a lot of people go to their grave who've had close encounters and they never talk about it, because all the people I spoke to had, and there were 100 people who reported things to me, all of them had never reported their experiences. Not a surprise, but there you go, we confirmed that. And I worked out from that, because we get about 100 reports a year in Brisbane, and we could easily, if we went out and actively sought UFO reports from the public, we could easily turn up about 3,000 per year. Easily. That's people who are willing to talk about it. So there is a huge percentage of people in the population. Next time, think about this, next time you're walking down the street and there are people walking past you, there are people who are living with this secret of having had some sort of close encounter. Now in 1990, I had my own close encounter experience. It was in the early hours of the morning, and I'm saying it's 1990, I'm not sure if it was that or 91. Early hours of the morning. This is very closely depicts what I experienced, where I woke up and I saw these three beings standing very close to me, laying in the bed. And I looked at them and I was utterly terrified. But there are people out there who will tell you about their experiences and they don't feel terrified at all. But I was. And my husband at the time was an insomniac. So if I moved, breathed the wrong way, he would be awake. Well, he remained completely in a deep sleep while this experience happened. And I've since heard a number, actually I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who report close encounters over the years, and where they will have an experience and their partner seems to be in this dead sleep, which is really unusual for them to be like that. Anyway, these beings didn't do anything, they just looked at me. And I did a very strange thing. Maybe it was normal for some of you, I don't know. I'm not a religious person, but I pulled the sheet up over, probably left over from my Sunday school years, somewhere in my unconscious there, somewhere. The next memory I have is waking up. It's morning. And then I have no memory of this experience the night before. But later that afternoon, something must have happened that triggered the memory, and it just came flooding back to me. And I have heard that story since, over and over and over and over again by people. Some people have far more complex experiences where they have full recall of being taken on board craft. I've had quite a few cases where people have reported to me that they've been taken on craft where they have seen beings in containers. Some of them are human looking, some of them are not. Some of them are look like these particular little guys. And I guess in one of them said it put a whole new meaning for me on the idea of mothership, because she said I had this feeling, and so at one stage in other reports people have been telepathically communicated that these extraterrestrials, or at least in these cases, move through our universe and they populate planets for their own reasons, not really clearly explained, but we do believe that when they come here and they take samples from people, that they have an agenda, whether it's positive, whether it's negative, we don't really know. All we can do is try and understand that or interpret that through how the people themselves interpret it. So, and as some people report positive experiences, some people report frightening experiences. And again, it's a bit of a mess, but we're still trying to figure it out. And some witnesses have very good, clear ideas of what it's about too, which I'm sure you'll hear from Mary tomorrow. Now, over time, I've been doing this for 28 years. I've come to realise that all these years I've thought that I was focused on the UFO phenomenon. Pretty much just that in close encounter reports, sightings, etc. I've focused on getting the details of those reports. Now, something I noticed around 2000 was that people who reported close encounters tended to be highly creative people. They'll be artists, musicians, singers, writers, performers, dancers, or they're interested in healing. So if you're hanging around people who do healing, you'll probably find there is a higher percentage of people in that field who've had close encounters. If you're hanging around people who are highly creative, performers, artists, writers, etc., you'll probably find a higher percentage of people in those areas that have had close encounters. Now, if you want, and the reason I came across this by accident, because for some reason in research this happens, is suddenly you'll get a run of witnesses who'll tell you something, and you'll go, oh, I've heard this before just recently, and then you'll get more and more and more. And it's like a new element enters the UFO phenomenon for some reason, and we stumbled across it. Anyway, in recent years, and this was right under my nose all along, but I just didn't put the two together, because in 1988, when I started going out into the field and interviewing people who've had close encounters, close sightings, or multiple sightings throughout their life, half of them were telling me that they'd had a near-death experience as well. I've since realised that that is far more common than what I might have once thought. Also, they will report out-of-body experiences. They will report telepathic connections with people. They will report poltergeist activity. They'll also report seeing ghosts and apparitions, having bizarre dreams and visions. They can be precognitive. They can suddenly develop spontaneous mediumship abilities. I've heard a lot of that in the last few years. They can undertake remote viewing, but spontaneously. They can have mystical meditations where they're meeting beings in these altered states of consciousness. They can also have after-death communications. And this comes up quite a bit, where not only have they had these close encounters, but they're a bit of the black sheep of the family, because since they were little, they've been like the weird kid, you know, the weird one in the family, and please don't bring that kid on Sunday to lunch. She's strange. They'll see dead people. They will, you know, relatives, friends, or people who are deceased and want to get a message to someone else. A lot of them struggle with that too. And they'll do spontaneous script writing and speak language, or speak something sounds like a language, like glossolalia, speaking in tongues, whatever it is. We don't fully understand that yet. So for me, rather than just looking at the UFO aspect of their life, that's become part of a bigger package now, which I call the close encounter package, basically. All of these things parallel their lives as well. That rickety looking ladder, for me, represents the UFO phenomenon that is taking us on a very interesting journey. Rich, deep, complex, full of high strangeness and things that we don't fully understand at the moment. And it's taking us on a journey to the cosmos. And for many of us, when we became involved in the UFO subject, we started to ask questions like, well, who are they? And where are they from? And why are they here? But over time, those questions have changed to, well, who am I? And where am I from? And why am I here? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the biggest paradigm shift of all. Thank you.